Okay. So first of all, it's really nice to meet you. I've been a fan of your work for a long time.
Thank you, Sidi. It's a great pleasure to join you.
Yeah, of course. So hello everyone, and welcome to another interview hosted by SpaceTourist. And we are an organization, a grassroots organization, dedicated to helping underserved youth when it comes to STEM. We believe that every child should have free access to educational resources, and we also strive to ensure that they have exposure to real life scientists as potential role models. So we have the great pleasure to be joined today by Dr. Avi Loeb, the Frank B. Jared Jr. Professor at Harvard University. So Professor Loeb is a theoretical physicist who founded the Black Hole Initiative. He was the science theory director in 2015 for the breakthrough initiatives of the Breakthrough Prize Foundation. He received a PhD in physics from Hebrew University of Jerusalem, was a former member of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology at the White House, and was selected by Time magazine as one of the most 25 influential people in space. And if I were to list the rest of his accomplishments and accolades out loud, half of the time we set aside for our interview would be taken up. So thank you, Dr. Loeb, for taking time out of your schedule to speak with us today.
Thank you for having me. We could have saved time if you just referred to me as a curious farm boy. I was born on a farm and I still maintain my childhood curiosity. I don't see myself any different than you.
That's great. So I guess we can get started with the questions. So you write essays in science and policy on Medium, which are great, by the way, and you also have written 8 books and over 1,000 research papers, and we will talk about some of those later. So what joy does writing bring you, and what have you learned as a seasoned author?
Yeah, so as I said, I just treat my work as a scientist, as a great privilege that I'm getting paid for doing what I really enjoy, which is answering questions that I have about the world. And so, the thing I didn't like as a kid was when I would sit at the dinner table and I would ask a difficult question, and the adults in the room would dismiss the question or give an answer that didn't make any sense, uh, just because they were pretending to know more. That's what adults do. They don't want to show any weakness. But the beauty of doing science is I decided I'll become a scientist because then I can answer the question myself. And I don't need to pretend. If I don't know the answer, I will say, I don't know. And, science is pretty much the only place where you can say, I don't know. That's a viable answer. If you are in politics, it will show weakness. So politicians never say they don't know. Clergy, in religious institutions never say, I don't. So the one privilege of being a scientist is you can say, I don't know, and I will try to find out by collecting evidence. It's just like a detective story. And that's what really attracts me. That's what gives me joy. Every day I learn something new about the universe. The fact that I'm getting paid for it is a miracle. I think if I were to live centuries ago, nobody would pay me to do that. But gladly, you can become a scientist and you will be paid for thinking about the world and trying to understand it. Now, the downside is that unlike the business world, you will not make a profit. So you're not in it for the money.
Mhm.
You're in it for the joy of figuring something out that nobody else before you understood. That's what really motivates me from very early on to understand things that other people never understood. And it's possible. There is so much we don't know. We don't know what most of the matter in the universe is. We don't know what happened before the Big Bang. We don't know what's inside a black hole. We don't know if we are alone. Is there another intelligent civilization on another planet near another star? Lots of questions. And if we can make progress towards solving one of them, that would be amazing. It could change our life if we find for example, outside the solar system. Suppose we discover another intelligent species out there, it will change our perspective about our life and our ambitions for the future. So, there are simple questions that you can ask. You can just say, okay, there are so many stars at night that I see far away. Is there someone like me next to one of these stars? That's a simple question, but to answer it requires a lot of work.
Mhm. Definitely. Our next question actually does have to do with life out in the universe. So, are we alone is a question that perhaps every single person who ever was, whoever is, and whoever will be, it's something that we have in common. And there's a lot of
Right.
speculation about life beyond Earth. And for people my age who I've talked with, we're definitely certain that, there is some form of life out there. Now, from a research standpoint, about the possibility of alien life, can you tell us more about it as the head of Harvard's Galileo project?
Right. So we now know more than Nicholas Copernicus or Galileo Galilei, who argued that we are not at the center of the universe. Before them, it was thought that we are at the center, physical center, but they argued no, the sun is probably at the center of the solar system, and the sun actually is moving around the center of the Milky Way galaxy. So we are not positioned in any privileged place. We are not privileged in terms of our position. And the next question, and I actually gave a talk about it in Poland, where Nicolaus Copernicus was born. I was talking about the next Copernican revolution, which is for us to realize that we are not at the intellectual center of the universe. We're not the smartest. There might be something else out there. Now, why is that a reasonable thing now to imagine? It's because we know that even in our own galaxy, which is one out of a trillion galaxies that we can observe in the universe, even within our own galaxy, which is a collection of stars, there are hundreds of billions of stars, the sun. And we now know that, a significant fraction of those sun-like stars, maybe a quarter, have a planet the size of the Earth, roughly at the same separation. So what you find is replicas of the Earth-Sun system, maybe 100 billion of them in the Milky Way galaxy, if we extrapolate from what we know. That's a big number. And just to argue that we are unique and special, there is nobody else like us among 100 billion Earth-Sun systems, I think it's arrogant. It's pretentious. However, if you ask many of the adults in the room, my colleagues, they would tell you, actually, it's an extraordinary claim, because we haven't found the evidence yet. I think it's actually an extraordinary claim that we are special. Because so far we were wrong. Whenever we argue that we are special, we turned out to be wrong. We are not at the center of the universe. And we know the conditions in the solar system. The Earth-Sun system is not really special in any way. We find it many times over. So, that makes it very plausible that there was someone else. Most of the stars formed billions of years before the sun. So the sun is a late bloomer. It just came to exist in the last 1/3 of cosmic history. And most of the stars formed before the sun. So there was plenty of time for someone smarter than us to develop science and technology much better than we did over the past century, and for them even to reach us with the same rockets that we are using. We sent a spacecraft like Voyager that will exit the solar system in 10,000 years. And, if someone sent a Voyager-like spacecraft from the other side of the Milky Way galaxy, it would have reached us in less than a billion years with the same technology that we are using right now. And so that means that if they existed more than a billion years ago, they had enough time to send a package that we can find in our backyard. And that's what I'm searching for. I'm searching for objects, maybe even space trash that was released or launched by other civilizations, because their trash is our treasure. We can learn about them, and maybe we will realize that they develop technologies that represent our future that we haven't developed yet.
Definitely. And I was reading your essays on Medium, which, by the way, are really incredible, really interesting. I got sucked into like a black hole of sorts. And there was this one essay, which is why is childlike bullying more prevalent than childlike curiosity, that really stood out to me. And you talked about being recognized by the media coverage and how like the impact toxicity towards new ideas, as you were saying, and ways of thinking has not only on the it has an impact on the scientists that you work with, but also those aspiring to become new scientists as well. So can you talk more about this sort of culture in academia and steps people can take to kind of avoid it and not do it anymore?
Yeah, it's again coming from the same tendency of people to pretend that they are the adults in the room. They know the answer in advance. They don't need someone else to tell them because they already know the answer. So, there are many people that enter academia, and once they become successful, they become quite arrogant. And that means that they think they know the answer in advance. They think they have enough knowledge that establish their reputation, and they will not listen to anything that contradicts this knowledge. And so they resist that because it's part of their ego. The problem is you get attached to your ego and then you don't listen. And the reason they get attached to their ego is because academia allows that. You can build an echo chamber around you when you become a professor like myself, where everyone repeats your mantra, everyone never supports what you say, just because those younger people need jobs in the future, so they would not contradict what you say, and then you feel that everything you say is correct and you don't listen to other ideas, and that's very dangerous because people go after honors, awards, and they're not open-minded. And the problem with that is, I'm resilient to push back when I'm trying to do something that sounds right to me and other people criticize it and push back against it or bully me. I don't care about it because by now I'm well established. I'm driven by curiosity. They are not. They're not driven by curiosity. They're driven either by jealousy towards the public attention that I get or that people receive when they do something that the public cares about. So I'm not affected by this pushback, which is very often superficial. However, young people are more vulnerable because they need to get a job, they need to get funded for their research, and so when they see those that kind of a response from the establishment, they are hesitating to innovate. And that's the worst thing that can happen in science. We know that even in the commercial sector, you look at big companies like Google, Facebook, OpenAI, they have a group of people that very often thinks about blue sky ideas, many of which fail, but sometimes one of these ideas ends up being very helpful. And so they realize that, even if 1 out of 10 ideas turns out to be correct, it's still worthwhile going through the process of considering those ideas. And it's good for the profit that the company makes. However, in academia, you would expect, as I said, it's not driven by money, so you would expect people to be even more open-minded. So why not discuss ideas that are out of the box? We are trying to figure out the answer. Maybe one of them would work out. But then because of ego, because of arrogance, very often the community is much more conservative than you find in the private sector, which is a contradiction of terms. Because, one thing in academia, a person like myself, I have tenure, so I have job security. I cannot be fired for having the wrong idea. But a lot of my colleagues are also in the same situation. Nevertheless, they don't deviate from the beaten path. They don't, say something that is quite different than everyone else is saying, because they want to get honors and awards and likes. So that is really the game. Now, if you ask me, what can young people that want to innovate in science, what do they need to do? So at first, they need to satisfy the wills of the more established scientists. And you do that by showing that you can do research on the subjects that everyone else is doing in the way that everyone else is doing it. And then you get a position that allows you more freedom. And at some point, you can start to take some risks and innovate. So my advice is start simple, where you don't go into conflict necessarily. There are stories like Albert Einstein that basically contradicted the dogma when he just started. He was in his 20s. It was a different time back then, and his ideas were eventually recognized shortly afterwards, within a decade. This is not the system that we have right now. So at first, I think you just demonstrate that you can do what everyone else is doing in the way that they're doing it. You keep your ideas, and then you start following them. as you progress and get more secure in your position. And eventually, when you get tenure in academia, that's actually the time for you to wait and start exploring the paths that were not taken by others. Because this way, we might find something new. We might discover new ideas that nobody else realized before. And that's the fun of doing science. I mean, otherwise, what's the point? Like we all die, and the only thing that we can feel really satisfied with is if we were able to find something new that nobody else knew before. And there is this poem by Robert Frost about taking the path that was not taken. And he says at the end of it, I did that, he says, and that made the whole difference, that you made it your way. And that's really what I advise to young people.
Yeah, those are great words and great pieces of advice. And kind of going back on this sort of like STEM superiority complex, I've met some people with it, and they believe that the humanities play no weight or importance, or that, since they're a bit easier than STEM, they're not worth as much. So, what do you say to such people who kind of
Yeah.
have these views?
I said this is completely incorrect. Now, what happens in the humanities is people are often obsessed. Traditionally, they were obsessed with philosophers of the past. For example, the ancient Greeks, Aristotle, Plato, they're being taught in every university in courses on philosophy. I have nothing against those ancient Greeks. I was in Thessaloniki, where at the Aristotle University, and gave a talk at a conference there just a couple of months ago. I have no issue with celebrating the success of ancient Greek philosophers. My point is that we have new challenges now. We have artificial intelligence that is entering society, and there are lots of ethical questions associated with artificial intelligence, and also legal questions. And philosophers, for example, or social scientists could find new challenges that were never contemplated by Plato or Aristotle, because there were computers, thousands of years ago. So these are new challenges. You have to ask yourself, what kind of authority to give to AI systems in deciding on medical procedures, who to punish when they actually do something bad, how to incorporate them into society. What about privacy? There are lots of ethical and legal issues associated with new technologies, and I think that philosophers and social scientists should focus on their profession in the future of humanity, and basically I call it humanities of the future rather than humanities of the past. And unfortunately, even at Harvard University, where I am, you do find courses on AI, but they mostly focus on how to use AI and not so much on how to address the challenges, the ethical challenges, the legal challenges that AI brings to society, which I think will open new avenues for people interested in the humanities to contribute very significantly, because these are not that scientists are qualified. Philosophers have a much better perspective on these questions.
Yeah, definitely. So as I said, this is this is for my organization called SpaceTourist, and we have a lot of students who dream big, which is always a very good thing, right? But sometimes, though, there are moments that truly challenge us and that truly challenge them. And so, what is one piece of advice that you can give to an to an aspiring researcher as they find themselves in either academia or industry or some totally unrelated field?
Right. So there are always ups and downs, and there are many reasons to be discouraged, because some people make a comment, or some people are trying to persuade you not to do what your passion is. And it takes a while. As a young person, I didn't have that belief in myself, because I was doubting that I'm good enough. But in retrospect, if I were to advise myself as a young person, I would basically say, just follow your passion and not don't pay attention, don't be dissuaded by other people who do not make sense to you. And it takes a while to arrive at this, because very often we are paying too much attention to people around us, and social media amplifies that, because social media allows any person to say what they think, and many of those people who express themselves do not have the credentials to say what they're saying. They either don't know you, or they are not qualified to say what they're saying, or they're just nasty. Very often you see toxicity. So, for example, I decided not to be on social media for that reason. So I avoid that. And every morning I jog at sunrise. I enjoy the company of ducks, rabbits, birds, wild turkeys. And so I feel that being connected to nature is so much more relaxing and supportive than being affected by what people say. So I would say, pay less attention to what people say about you and develop a plan based on your passion. It's easy to say, it's not easy to practice this, because you need to have enough backbone, enough self-confidence that you really want to do that. But I'm trying to say that you shouldn't be affected too much by what other people say, especially people who pretend to be the adults in the room, who tell you, you really need to do what traditionally I think you should have done in the first place. Because, if you look at the past, many things were done wrong, and many opinions are wrong. And the only way for us to have a better future is by believing in ourselves and not listening to people who want to maintain the same old tradition. This is really the source of us keep making the same mistakes. If you look at around the world, there are all these conflicts because politicians just reproduce the past, introduce wars, they introduce conflicts, and most people just accept it like the weather. And I say, never accept what people tell you as the weather, because you can be responsible for changing it.
That's a good quote. That's a really good quote. So you're an incredible astrophysicist and you're a prolific storyteller backed by your research, your books, your essays, as well as talks and interviews. So what is your favorite part of sharing astronomy with the public?
My favorite is actually, for example, what I did this morning. I woke up at 4 a.m. because I usually jog at sunrise. And then I looked at the news in Science, and I found that there was a paper published on the latest results from the Webb telescope. This paper basically says the Webb telescope discovered something new, which was rubies in the sky, red rubies. They're called little red dots. These are galaxies like the Milky Way that existed when the universe was 20 times younger. So we're talking about the very infant universe. And they are puzzling because they are very compact, very small, these galaxies. They appear very red, and they probably have a black hole at their center. So they have a nugget in the middle. And so the question is, what are these things? And then I remember that I actually, 30 years ago, I wrote a paper explaining or predicting that the seeds of the big black holes that we find today in the universe, the seeds could have been made in very compact galaxies that formed early on. And now, apparently, the Webb telescope is seeing them. So I decided to communicate that, and I wrote an essay about it. It was posted already in two places, medium.com and also the brief. It gives me pleasure to basically explain, several things. First, that there are these objects that I thought about 30 years ago, and I didn't know that they exist. So it's beautiful to see an idea being realized by nature, that the Webb telescope is telling us about these small galaxies, little red dots. But the second thing is, I don't expect other people to remember that I wrote these scientific papers because they were so long ago. But it doesn't really matter. The point is that by collecting evidence, data from nature, we will eventually be guided to the truth. And so even if people don't remember what I said 30 years ago, it doesn't matter, because now they have these small galaxies, they realize, okay, something is happening along the lines that I predicted. And so, that gives me joy, because I thought about it before we knew that it exists, these small galaxies, and we see them now, and it's the Webb telescope, the most sophisticated telescope we have, looking, peering all the way through the universe to when the universe was extremely young, because the light took so long to reach us, 13.2 billion years in that case. Those galaxies are younger than 600 years. And so, it's just fun to figure out the universe. This is not one of the biggest puzzles that we have, but nevertheless, it gives me pleasure for one morning. And when I went to the jog, I was really happy about that.
Definitely. So, just for your insight, we have two more questions left. And one of them is the Vera Rubin Observatory is projected to launch into space in 2025. So, how do you think current observations will be impacted? And this question is based on the article you wrote called Are Dyson Spheres Real?
Right. So the Rubin Observatory is a new telescope that was funded by the National Science Foundation in Chile, and it will start operations in 2025. It will survey the entire southern sky every 4 days, and it will use a camera that has 3.2 billion pixels, 1,000 times more than the number of pixels in your cell phone. And so it will be an amazing data that pipeline that could allow us to discover objects that are passing close to Earth. And I calculated that there should be at least one big object that will be discovered every couple of months that came from outside the solar system, as big as a football field, that reflects enough sunlight for us to see. There was such an object in 2017 discovered by a telescope in Hawaii, but the Rubin Observatory is far more sensitive in Chile, and so we will see many of those. The one that was found in 2017 was really unusual because it was tumbling every 8 hours, and the amount of sunlight that was reflected from it changed by a factor of 10 as it was tumbling. So it must have had a very extreme shape, and the best fit for the variation of light was that of a pancake, a flat object. And moreover, this object was pushed away from the sun by some mysterious force without showing any cometary evaporation. And I suggested that it's just the sunlight reflecting from it that is pushing it. And for that, the object had to be very thin. And indeed, later in September 2020, there was an object found to be pushed by reflecting sunlight with no cometary evaporation. Turned out that was a rocket booster that was launched by NASA in 1966. So we know that such objects could exist because we launched one, and that one was artificial. So, if we end up concluding that such an object is artificially made, not by us because it was moving too fast for our objects, then that would tell us that we are not alone, and that's why it was so significant. And the Rubin Observatory can find this space trash if it's out there, and so that's the hope. And together with my postdocs, I'm waiting for the data that will come from the Rubin Observatory, and maybe among all the rocks that enter the solar system from outside, we will find something like Voyager or something like this rocket booster, some space trash that was manufactured by someone else. And one possible example of space trash is if you imagine a civilization that built a sphere around their star. It's called a Dyson sphere, in order to harvest all the light that the star is producing. After a while, that Dyson sphere it's called Dyson because after Freeman Dyson, who thought about it first in a scientific paper. So I realized that, after a while, this sphere will be bombarded by asteroids and could break up into pieces. And so perhaps Oumuamua was a piece of a broken Dyson sphere. And So we could find such pieces if they are out there with the Rubin Observatory, and I'm very much looking forward to the data that will come next year.
Yeah, that's amazing, amazing research. So now for our final question, I would like to ask you about what thoughts about the nature of our universe keep you up at night?
Oh, what happened before the Big Bang?
Mm,
Because it's possible, once we reach a high enough level of science, we will realize how the universe was made. And we could potentially make it in the laboratory if we know the recipe for making a universe. So if you imagine another civilization that could have reached that level and they know how to make a baby universe in the laboratory, perhaps our universe was created by a scientist in a white lab coat. And that fits the job description of God. If there was a job description, suppose you want to recruit a godlike entity, then you would say, well, your job requirement is to be able to create a universe. And if a scientist will be able to do that, I would argue that that scientist is a good approximation to God. So we can, on the one hand, develop our own understanding of the Big Bang and eventually reach that level, or we can find a scientist in our cosmic neighborhood who might have been that accomplished.
wow,
And that would be like meeting God.
definitely. So thank you so much for this interview, for responding, for taking time out of your busy schedule just to do this. I really had a nice time hearing everything you had to say.
Thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure.